In the city of Corvalon, located on the outskirts of the great kingdom of Valenwald, life moved at a leisurely pace. A quiet and peaceful place, Corvalon was known for its moss-lined cobblestone streets, moss-covered homes, markets filled with merchants selling goods from the dense forests, and its people, who rarely cared about the outside world. Their greatest concern of late was the failing health of King Kylan the Protector, the noble ruler who had protected the kingdom from invaders and ensured peace for many years. There were rumors about who would take his throne if he died, but for most, it was a matter far removed from their daily lives. One evening, a stranger arrived in Corvalon. He was an elderly man, his long white hair flowing like a river of moonlight, and he wore a gray cloak of unusual and expensive design. At his side was a small girl, no more than 5 years old, with golden curls and eyes as bright as the morning sun. The old man introduced her as Ariela, his granddaughter. Together they sought lodging at the Timber Hearth, a warm and welcoming inn on the main road where weary travelers found both food and shelter. The inn was a sturdy building, its walls of dark wood and stone standing firm against the passage of time. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread, and a large fire burned at all hours, its flickering flames casting long shadows across the wooden beams. Saldrin, as the old man called himself, was a man of few words, but he seemed out of place. He glanced over his shoulder frequently, as if expecting someone to step out of the shadows. His sharp eyes scanned the room warily, and Ariela clung to him, sensing his unease. Something or someone had brought them to Corvalon, and Saldrin wasn't sure they'd escaped it yet. Having rented rooms for themselves and Ariela, they fell asleep immediately after the long, hard journey. One morning, as he and Ariela were walking down the stairs for breakfast, they heard the innkeeper talking in a low, worried voice to a regular customer.
"My wife is ill."
The innkeeper said,
"Worse than before. The local doctor has done all he could, but nothing is helping, I'm afraid."
He paused, shaking his head. The innkeeper, Bertram, was a sturdy man with graying hair and a kind face, though today it was twisted with worry. He straightened up as he approached Saldrin's table and forced a tired smile.
"Good morning,"
he greeted.
"Shall I bring you your usual breakfast?"
"Yes,"
Saldrin replied, nodding. Then after a pause, he added,
"I couldn't help but hear your troubles, Bertram. Forgive me for butting in."
Bertram sighed and ran a hand over his face.
"Yes, my wife Elira, she's gotten worse. The doctor says he's done all he can. I don't know what to do."
Saldrin's eyes darkened with thought.
"I'm a healer myself.
He said at last.
Perhaps I'll take a look at her."
The innkeeper's eyes widened in surprise, but there was also a glimmer of hope in them.
"You? Well, that would be a blessing. If you think you can help, please come with me."
Saldrin nodded. He turned to Ariela, who was busy with a small wooden toy he'd carved for her.
"Come, little one,"
he said softly.
"We have work to do."
The trio climbed the stairs, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets, and made their way through the back of the tavern to the innkeeper's quarters. Bertram pushed open the door. Saldrin stepped forward, his gaze sharp and measuring. Whatever misfortune befell Bertram's wife, he would uncover it. And perhaps in doing so, he could also stave off the fate that stalked him from the shadows. The room was dimly lit. The single window shuttered to keep out the cool morning air. A candle burned, its flickering light casting long, shifting shadows on the stone walls. The air was thick with the smell of sickness, a mixture of sweat and stale breath that brought no relief. In the farthest corner, on a rough wooden bed covered with a simple woolen blanket, lay a woman, her face pale as wax, her breathing labored and uneven. Bertram, the innkeeper, stood in the doorway, shifting uneasily from one foot to the other. Beside him, little Ariela clutched at the folds of her guardian's cloak, watching silently with wide, knowing eyes. Seldrin approached the bed and gently laid a hand on the woman's forehead. It was damp with fever. Her lips were cracked and her breathing was ragged. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat, feeling the faint pulse.
Tell me, how long has she been ill?
He asked, not looking up. Bertram cleared his throat.
More than 2 weeks.
He said, his voice laced with worry. Seldrin frowned, his fingers lightly tracing the woman's chest, feeling the wheezing deep in her lungs.
And I understand that she is getting worse. Is her breathing becoming heavier?
Yes,
Bertram admitted.
Sometimes at night she coughs incessantly until she is too weak to move.
Seldrin exhaled through his nose, rubbing his chin thoughtfully.
I see.
He murmured. He straightened and turned to Bertram.
Come. I will prepare the medicine. You are to steep the herbs in hot water and rub her back with the salve I will give you. It does not smell very pleasant,
He added with a wry smile.
but it will do her good.
Bertram nodded quickly.
I will do as you say.
You are not to miss a single dose.
Seldrin warned.
Tea and salve, 3 times a day, without fail. Do you understand?
Yes, of course.
Bertram said, his voice firm and decisive.
3 times a day.
Seldrin nodded briefly and moved toward the door. Ariela followed him without a word, her small hand still clutching his cloak. Together they walked down the long hallway to the healer's room. When they reached his room, Bertram hesitated.
I don't know how to thank you.
He said at last.
How much do I owe you?
Seldrin shook his head.
You owe me nothing. The only payment I demand is your wife's health. If her condition worsens, wake me, even in the dead of night.
Bertram's face softened with gratitude.
Then at least allow me to offer you breakfast on the house.
Seldrin inclined his head.
Very well, I agree.
As the days passed, the innkeeper's wife grew stronger. She rose from her bed, first for a few minutes, then for longer walks in the streets. The color returned to her face, and soon the tavern was filled with laughter again. Bertram, beside himself with joy, could not contain himself. He told every customer who entered his establishment about the healer who had saved his wife. The story spread like wildfire across Corvalon, and soon those suffering from ailments and injuries began to seek out Seldrin. At first it was a trickle, an old man with sore joints, a young boy with a fever. Then it became a flood. Within 3 months the healer had cured half the city. But in the high towers of Castle Corvalon, news of the miracle worker had reached the ears of more powerful men. It was early morning when the heavy wooden door of the tavern slammed open. The room fell silent as a group of royal guards entered, their armor gleaming in the dim light. At their head was a sergeant with a grim expression, and at his side stood a nobleman in fine robes. Bertram, who had been wiping the counter, paused for only a moment before regaining his composure.
Sirs,
He said carefully, bowing his head.
how may I be of service?
The nobleman's gaze swept around the room before settling on the innkeeper.
We're looking for a healer.
He said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Bertram hesitated. Then he waved reluctantly toward the stairs.
He lives on the 2nd floor, first door on the right.
The nobleman and the sergeant rose without another word. There was a sharp knock at the door. Seldrin, still sleepy, shuffled to open it, his white hair disheveled. His expression darkened as he saw the 2 men standing before him.
The reception begins at 10. I'm not ready yet.
He muttered. The sergeant didn't hesitate. He strode past Seldrin into the room, forcing the older man to step aside to avoid being trampled. Seldrin flushed.
What impudence!
He snapped. The noble followed, though with more grace, and bowed his head.
Forgive the intrusion, Master Healer, but the matter is urgent. You must come with us at once.
Saldrin crossed his arms over his chest, his sharp eyes studying the men before him.
And if I refuse?
The nobleman's lips twitched with the hint of a smile.
That would be unwise. The summons comes from a higher authority.
Saldrin sighed, running a hand through his long white hair.
At least allow me to dress.
Of course.
The nobleman replied softly.
We will wait outside.
The two men left the room, closing the door behind them. Saldrin sighed in frustration. He moved quickly, gathering his bag of herbs and potions. Before leaving, he turned to Bertram, who stood anxiously at the foot of the stairs.
Keep an eye on Ariela,
he said quietly.
You have my word,
the innkeeper replied. Saldrin threw his cloak over his shoulders and walked out into the street. A small crowd had gathered, their faces full of curiosity and concern. The nobleman pointed to the waiting horses.
Come, Master Healer, the king awaits.
And with that they set off toward the castle. The convoy passed under the great stone arch of Corvalon city gates and moved not toward the towering castle, but along a winding road that led to the northern district where the homes of nobles and high officials stood. Saldrin, sitting restlessly on his borrowed horse, narrowed his eyes. Something about the route seemed deliberate. Finally, on horseback, the noble and healer separated from the escort of soldiers, continuing alone toward the castle gates. Guards dressed in the colors of Valenwald stood at attention as the two men entered the keep. Inside, the castle was a place of ancient splendor. High vaulted ceilings, tall stained glass windows that cast shades of blue and gold across the marble floors, and tapestries depicting the victories of King Corvalon the Protector. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting a dim, wavering light down the long corridors. The nobleman walked ahead, his stride steady but determined. He turned his head slightly as he spoke.
My name is Sir Aemon Blackwood,
he said.
I have been sent to you on a most delicate mission.
Saldrin, who had been studying the castle's architecture, glanced at him.
What mission?
The situation is grave.
Blackwood continued, lowering his voice.
Our king, Corvalon the Protector, is growing worse every day. His son is too young to take the throne. If the king perishes before his heir comes of age, the kingdom will descend into chaos. Many of the nobles will try to take advantage of the uncertainty. Rebellion could break out, and with it war.
Saldrin's expression remained unreadable.
A delicate situation indeed,
he murmured.
You are a man of rare talent, healer. I have heard much of your skill, and I beg you, do all you can.
Saldrin bowed his head.
I will do all I can, but you must understand. There are ailments that no healer, no matter how skilled, can cure.
Blackwood exhaled slowly.
I understand, but even the smallest hope is better than nothing.
They reached a large set of double doors, elaborately carved with the symbol of the royal house, a great stag standing in the sun. Blackwood pushed them open and they stepped inside. The king's chambers were a room of great wealth and splendor. Thick red velvet curtains hung from the tall windows, filtering the light into a dim golden glow. A large four-poster bed rested at the far end of the chamber, its heavy wooden frame carved with images of past rulers. Around it, servants moved like silent shadows, whispering to one another in low voices. At a nod from Blackwood, the servants hurried away, leaving the healer and the noble alone with the ailing king. Saldrin stepped forward, his keen gaze falling on the man before him. King Corvalon lay motionless on the great bed, his once mighty frame reduced to skin and bone. His face, once strong and proud, was now sunken and pale. His eyes remained closed, his chest rising and falling with slow, labored breathing. The scent of sickness hung in the air. The healer placed his bag on the nightstand and carefully lowered himself onto the bed next to the king. His long fingers moved with practiced precision as he touched the king's forehead, then felt for a pulse in his neck.
What was his complaint?
Saldrin asked, not looking up. Blackwood crossed his arms.
He no longer speaks. He has stopped eating and will not open his eyes. His breathing is heavy, as if he were struggling with each breath. We have sought every physician in the kingdom, but none have been able to help him. He only grows weaker.
Seldrin nodded grimly. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a number of instruments, small wooden sticks for opening the mouth, a vial of strong-smelling oils for testing the senses, and a thin metal instrument for listening to the king's chest. He worked in silence for several minutes, his expression unreadable. Finally, he leaned back.
His body is weakening.
He said simply,
There's a disease deep in his lungs that will not heal on its own. But there is still a chance, if we act quickly.
Blackwood's gaze grew sharp.
What do you need?
Seldrin began to put the instruments back in his satchel.
I will prepare several tinctures and tonics. These must be given to him at regular intervals. I will also need fresh ingredients, many of which can only be found in the forest. I must go there myself to gather them.
You will be provided with everything you need.
Blackwood assured him.
A room has already been prepared for you in the castle. You will occupy the room next to this one. You will be assigned a servant to assist you.
Seldrin nodded.
That will be enough. But I will also need to collect my things from the tavern, and my granddaughter will remain there. She must be brought here.
Blackwood placed a reassuring hand on the healer's shoulder.
Don't worry. Your things are already being gathered, and your granddaughter will be safely delivered to the castle. She will be well cared for.
Seldrin hesitated, then exhaled.
Very well. I shall go at once.
He and a castle servant, a young man named Thomas, rode out from the gates before noon, traveling deep into the surrounding woods. The healer knew precisely what he sought: bitterroot for fever, fireleaf for strength, and black elderberry for the lungs. The trees loomed tall around them, the rustling of leaves and distant calls of birds filling the air. Under Seldrin's guidance, they gathered the herbs swiftly. The healer worked with methodical care, ensuring that no plant was damaged beyond what was needed. By the time the sun began its descent, they had all they required. Upon returning to the castle, he found his new chamber prepared, his belongings neatly arranged. Ariela had already arrived. She sat upon a cushioned chair near the fireplace, watching as the healer began his work. Bottles were set in careful rows. The gathered herbs were laid upon cloth to dry. The room soon filled with the mingling scents of crushed leaves and simmering tinctures. Thomas moved about, assisting as best he could, placing jars in their proper places and grinding roots under Seldrin's instructions. As the evening deepened, Seldrin decided to take a rest, his work for the night complete. He turned toward Ariela, who gazed up at him with curiosity.
Grandpa, will you cure the king better?
She asked softly. Seldrin placed a hand on her small head.
I will do what I can.
And as he gazed out the window toward the darkening forest beyond, he could not shake the feeling that something unseen was at play. Forces moved in the shadows of Valenwald, forces that had yet to reveal their true purpose. Tomorrow he would begin the treatment, but whether the king would live, that was yet to be seen. For weeks, Seldrin labored in the king's chambers, preparing elixirs, tinctures, and poultices with the precision of a man who knew his every action could mean the difference between life and death. The scent of brewed herbs and ground roots filled the royal halls, mingling with the heavy tapestries and flickering candlelight. The healer never left his patient for long, instructing the king's servants on how to administer tonics and watching every breath, every movement with unwavering vigilance. At first, little changed, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, the king began to heal. His sunken eyes, long frozen in feverish sleep, began to open. He sipped broth, then small portions of food. His voice, weak and hoarse, returned to a whisper before it was strong enough to speak. One morning, Seldrin entered the king's chambers to find him propped up against pillows looking out the window. His complexion had regained some of its color, and his breathing, once labored, had evened out.
You are awake.
Seldrin noted with a small smile. The king turned his head.
And alive, thanks to you.
The healer sat on the edge of the bed and looked closely at his patient.
How do you feel today, Your Highness?
Like a man pulled back from the brink,
the king admitted.
but better.
Saldrin nodded.
You will need to continue taking the tonics, just as I told you. Miss one dose, and we may lose the progress we have made.
I obey, healer. I would not risk my life when I was so close to losing it.
The king took a deep breath. Months passed, and the king was strong enough to rise from his bed, then walk the halls and finally go to the royal gardens. News of his miraculous recovery spread like wildfire throughout the kingdom. Courtiers and nobles whispered of his skill as a healer, and the common people spoke his name with reverence. Then one day, as the two men walked in the garden under the twilight sky, the king turned to Saldrin and said,
I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with mere words. I would have you remain here as my royal physician.
Saldrin, who had never sought power or titles, felt uneasy.
I do not ask for such an honor, Your Majesty.
But you have earned it.
The king insisted.
Is there nothing you desire?
Saldrin thought of Ariela, of their quiet life before the king's illness, and then he said,
If I have to stay, I ask only for a quiet place where I can live with my granddaughter and practice my craft in peace.
The king smiled.
It shall be done.
So Saldrin was given a home near the royal gardens, with an entrance that overlooked the central square of Corvalon. There he continued his work, becoming a healer not only to the nobility, but to anyone who sought his help. The people of Corvalon welcomed him warmly wherever he went, and the city prospered under the watchful rule of its newly restored king. As the years passed, Ariela grew. No longer a small child clinging to her grandfather's robes, she blossomed into a witty, intelligent young woman. Saldrin, knowing his years were numbered, began to pass on all he knew. They walked the woods together, and he showed her the difference between bitterroot and fireleaf, how to mix tinctures that could cure fevers, and how to distill poisons into medicines. When Ariela had finished studying the preparation of medicines and elixirs and was thinking of taking a break from her studies, he placed before her an ancient tome, full of symbols and images, unlike anything she had ever seen before.
You must learn this language,
he said. Ariela frowned.
But why, Grandpa? I do not understand.
One day you will,
he said simply. He taught her words no one in Corvalon had ever heard, symbols that held secrets lost to time. At night she pored over the book, struggling with the strange letters, and during the day she assisted him in his practice, grinding herbs and preparing simple medicines. Many suitors came to her, drawn by her beauty and the prestige of her association with the king's favorite healer, but she rejected them all. She had no time for men with empty words. There was too much to learn, too much to uncover. Then one day a wealthy merchant arrived at their home, dressed in silk and bedecked with jewels. He proposed an obscene amount of gold for Ariela's hand. Saldrin's face darkened. Without a word, he grabbed the merchant by the arm and threw him out of the house.
Don't come back,
he warned. And the merchant, humiliated, never returned. But time was cruel. Saldrin, who healed others, could not heal himself. His hands, once as hard as stone, began to tremble. His movements slowed. His breathing became shallow. One day he fell, and Ariela rushed to him.
Grandpa, what's wrong?
She asked nervously.
It's all right, child. Don't worry. Help me to my room. I need to lie down.
Saldrin answered, barely breathing. Ariela called Thomas, and they walked slowly to Saldrin's room. She sat next to him, watching him as he once watched his patients, but the old healer knew that the end was near.
Listen to me, child,
he murmured. She leaned down, taking his fragile hand in hers.
There is something you must do,
he said, pressing the cold iron key into her palm.
Do you remember the door at the back of the house? The one I forbade you to enter?
Yes, Grandfather,
she whispered.
If anything happens to me, you must go there. You must wake him.
Her brow furrowed.
Who?
Saldrin's breathing became ragged.
You'll know when you see it. Prick your finger with a needle, drip blood on it, and it will awaken. Listen to it. It will lead you to another world.
Ariela stared at him, fear and confusion warring within her.
Grandfather, I don't understand. What are you talking about?
He closed his eyes, exhaling a long, shaking sigh.
You will understand. In time.
Ariela sat next to him all night, unwilling to leave him. Downstairs, their servant Thomas ran the shop selling potions. But in the silence of this dark room, Ariela held the key tightly in her hand, feeling its cold weight on her skin. What was behind the secret door, and who or what was waiting to be awakened? She didn't know. After a while, she decided that her grandfather was feeling ill and didn't understand what he was saying. But he would get better and everything would be as before. Ariela carried the wooden tray carefully, the smell of warm broth and freshly baked bread filling the small hallway as she climbed the stairs. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards beneath her feet. She reached her grandfather's room and pushed the door open with her shoulder. A cool morning breeze blew through the half-open window, stirring the curtains slightly. The scent of dried herbs mingled with the fresh air, and for a moment, all seemed peaceful.
Grandpa,
She called softly, setting the tray on the nightstand.
I brought you food. You should eat to restore your strength.
There was no answer. Ariela frowned and stepped closer. Saldrin lay motionless, his face slightly turned to the side, not breathing.
Grandpa?
She repeated, and a sudden chill ran down her spine. She reached for his hand, and it was cold. A shudder ran through her as she pressed her fingers to his wrist. There was no pulse.
Grandpa, please.
She whispered, shaking him gently, but his body did not move. As she fell to her knees beside the bed, her vision was blurred with tears. Her hands clutched his lifeless fingers as sobs racked her body. The only father she had ever known, the man who had taught her everything, was gone. Downstairs, Thomas, their servant, heard the sound of her crying. His heart sank with fear, and he ran up the stairs, his boots pounding. He reached the doorway and stopped. A spectacle of grief unfolded before him. Saldrin lay still, his face peaceful in death, and Ariela wept beside him, her golden hair falling on his chest. Thomas did not speak. He hung his head in grief. The news spread through Corvalon like wildfire. The great healer, the man who had saved the king himself, was dead. Bells rang from every tower, their solemn ringing echoing through the streets. People wept openly in the markets and squares, as if they had lost a beloved father. The king himself declared a day of mourning, and half the city dressed in black. No one could imagine a world without Saldrin's wisdom, without his steady hands and kind heart. On the morning of his funeral, thousands gathered outside the city walls to pay their respects. His resting place had been chosen with great care, a beautiful clearing in the forest, where wild flowers bloomed and the wind carried the scent of pine and earth. Ariela stood before the grave, her hands clenched into fists, her heart heavy. She had lost her protector, her teacher, her last family. The years passed, and Ariela filled the role her grandfather had once played. She spent her days mixing potions, healing wounds, and tending to the sick. The people of Corvalon had come to trust her as they had trusted Saldrin. Her hands, once unsure, became sure. The knowledge he had left behind, his books, his notes, his whispered lessons, guided her. But then came the fateful day that changed everything. The king, now an old man, began construction of a great cathedral, a monument that would stand for generations. But stone and labor were expensive, and the royal treasury was quickly depleted. The solution came naturally, though at a terrible cost. Merchant Roderick Blackthorne, the richest in Corvalon, visited the king with an offer. He would finance the entire construction, donating a fortune beyond what was required. The king, though suspicious, asked,
What do you want in return?
The merchant smiled, his keen eyes calculating.
I wish to marry Ariela, granddaughter of the great healer Saldrin.
The king hesitated. He knew Ariela was devoted to her work. He knew she had rejected many suitors. Forcing her into marriage would be unthinkable. But then he thought of the cathedral, of his legacy. Without Blackthorn's gold, the project would fail. The king agonized over the decision for many nights, wrestling with his conscience. At last the choice was made. A summons was sent. Ariela was treating an old woman's fever when Thomas walked into the shop, his face pale.
Ariela,
He said breathlessly.
the king has summoned you to the castle immediately.
She looked up, surprised. The king had never summoned her before. Was someone sick? Had the plague struck the city again? She put down the mortar and pestle, wiped her hands on a cloth, and hurried to change. The king's summons could not be ignored. As she walked toward the castle, her heart pounded. Something was wrong. Ariela was led through the grand halls of the castle, her boots clicking softly on the polished marble floors. High arched windows let golden sunlight into the hallways, but it did little to dispel the ominous feeling in her chest. The guards led her into a large room where the king sat in a high-backed chair, his face dark and brooding. He looked older than she remembered, the weight of years and burdens pressing down on him. As she entered, he forced a smile and stood, moving toward her with carefully measured grace.
Ariela, I am glad you accepted my invitation.
He said, gesturing to a nearby couch. Ariela hesitated. Something in his tone unsettled her. It wasn't just an invitation, it was something else.
It did not seem like an invitation, Your Majesty.
She said, her voice wary.
I felt like something had happened, something serious.
The king chuckled, but there was little warmth in the sound.
No, of course not. But I have a delicate matter to discuss with you.
Ariela sat tensely as the king sat down next to her.
You have doubtless heard of the grand cathedral I am building.
He began, his voice full of pride and determination.
It will be the most magnificent structure in all the kingdoms, a symbol of our power and faith.
Yes.
Ariela said carefully.
It is truly a fine work, Your Majesty. It will surely elevate your name as a great ruler.
The king nodded as if savoring the thought.
Yes, but there is a problem, a rather pressing one.
Ariela frowned.
What is the problem?
The treasury is nearly empty.
The king admitted, rubbing his temples.
We don't have the funds to complete the cathedral. However, I have been offered a solution, and you are the key to it.
Ariela blinked in confusion.
Me?
The king folded his hands together, his gaze hard.
Merchant Roderick Blackthorn has offered to finance the completion of the cathedral in exchange for your hand and heart.
A cold shiver ran down Ariela's spine.
What do you mean, Your Highness?
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
He wishes to marry you.
The king said bluntly. Ariela's hands clenched into fists.
I will not marry such an old man,
she cried. The king sighed.
I understand your hesitation, but think of what you will gain. He is rich, powerful. He can give you everything you want. Comfort, luxury, security. You will need nothing.
Ariela jumped to her feet, her eyes blazing with rage.
I would rather have nothing than be chained to this man.
The king didn't seem surprised by her reaction. If anything, he seemed almost to have vanished.
I thought you would say that,
he admitted.
But I'm afraid you have no choice.
Ariela's breath caught in her throat.
What do you mean?
He looked at the girl, his eyes cold and calculating.
The house you live in was given to your grandfather by the crown. It was paid for from the treasury, and now the treasury is empty.
He paused, then added,
I'm selling it.
Ariela's heartbeat thundered in her ears.
You can't.
I must,
the king said grimly.
I need the gold to replenish the royal coffers. And then there is the matter of your debt.
Ariela's anger turned to stunned disbelief.
What debt?
She demanded.
For all the years you and grandfather lived in this house, for the property, for the land, for the resources you used, it was never truly yours.
Tears of anger welled up in her eyes.
Is this your gratitude? After my grandfather saved your life?
The king's expression remained impassive.
I have no choice. Sorry. You have until tomorrow to give me an answer.
Ariela could take it no longer. She turned and ran from the room, her pulse pounding in her ears. The guards barely had time to step aside before she rushed past them, ran through the corridors, and out of the castle. She ran through the streets, ignoring the curious glances of the townspeople, her vision blurred by tears. When she reached her house, she slammed the door behind her and ran up the stairs to her room. She threw herself on her bed, her body shaking, sobs racking her. There was a knock at the door, followed by Thomas's voice.
Ariela, what happened? What did the king want?
Leave me alone.
She screamed, her voice choked with grief and rage. Thomas paused, then sighed and walked away, leaving her alone with her sorrow. But as the night wore on and the weight of the king's words weighed on her, Ariela wondered what she should do now. She sat on the edge of her bed, her mind reeling with rage and despair. The king had betrayed her, selling her hand like a trinket to a man she did not know. She had no allies, no choice, no way out. And then the memory came back like a whisper in the dark.
Listen to me carefully. If anything happens to me, you must go there and wake him.
Her grandfather had said in his last days. Her breath caught in her throat, the key, the door at the back of the house. She jumped to her feet, rummaging frantically through her things. She rummaged through cabinets, drawers, turned over a desk. Then her fingers closed around something cold and metallic. She pulled it out, an old iron key, worn with age. Without hesitation, she rushed through the house, past the shelves of herbs and elixirs, past the silent, empty space that had once been filled with her grandfather's presence. She reached the locked door at the back of the house. The key trembled in her hand as she inserted it into the rusty lock. With a groan and a soft click, the door swung open. Darkness greeted her. The room smelled of dust and long-buried secrets. The windows were boarded up and the air was thick and still. Ariela reached into her pocket, pulling out the small candle she carried absently with her. With trembling hands, she struck a match and lit it. As a flickering glow filled the space, her breath caught in her throat. In the center of the room, suspended in midair, was a small stone, a deep red gemstone no bigger than an apple, hovering as if held by invisible hands. Ariela's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She couldn't understand what she was seeing.
As he said.
She muttered under her breath, trying to remember her grandfather's instructions. She swallowed hard, then pricked her fingertip with the needle, wincing as a drop of blood came out. Slowly, she reached out and let the drop fall onto the stone. At first, nothing happened. Her lips parted, about to whisper in confusion, when suddenly, a glow awoke in the stone. It pulsed like a dormant heart awakening from a deep sleep. The glow expanded, veins of scarlet light crawling across its surface, until the entire stone glowed with an eerie, otherworldly radiance. Then a voice rang out in the room.
"Oh, I overslept,"
it grumbled. Ariela stepped back, nearly dropping the candle.
You can talk?
"Of course I can. Ah, Ariela, finally,"
the voice answered cheerfully.
"Your grandfather told me a lot about you."
She swallowed hard.
Who? What are you?
"A better question is, are you ready to leave?"
the stone asked.
Leave?
Ariela repeated, shocked.
Where?
"To our world, of course."
She was in shock as she tried to comprehend it.
To our world? What are you talking about?
"This is the kingdom of humans,"
the stone explained.
"But the elves, dwarves, and other magical creatures are long gone. They don't live here anymore."
Ariela froze, trying to understand what she was hearing. The stone chuckled.
Yes, I know it's a shock. Your grandfather didn't want to burden you with too much at once, but time is short."
She narrowed her eyes.
What do you mean? Why?
The stone pulsed again.
"Because they're coming for you."
A chill ran down her spine.
Who? What are you talking about?
She whispered.
"You will understand."
A loud knock on the door, a heavy iron fist pounding on wood. Ariela's breath caught in her throat. She turned and ran from the room, rushing to the window. The first rays of dawn were beginning to paint the city in gold and crimson. And at the front door she saw them, the royal guard, armed and armored. They had come to take her to the castle. She turned toward the secret room. She had to run, but where? As if reading her thoughts, the stone pulsed again.
Gather your things, quickly!
Her hands shook as she grabbed her cloak and her grandfather's old book, the one filled with symbols and strange languages that she had studied long and hard. A swirling vortex appeared before her, a vast portal of shimmering red and gold stretching through the air like a door to the unknown. Her candle flickered, trying to compete with the strange, ethereal glow of the gate. She stared, confused.
Is this true?
Follow me!
The stone commanded, floating toward the portal.
And don't forget the bag in the corner of the room.
Ariela barely had time to think. Behind her, the guards began pounding on the door, their shouts growing louder. She hesitated for only a moment, slung the small leather bag over her shoulder, barely noticing what was inside, and then ran. With one last look at the world she was leaving, she stepped forward and dove through the portal. The gate slammed shut behind her the moment she stepped through the threshold. The house fell silent. The guards burst through the door moments later but found nothing, just an empty house and a residual trace of magic in the air. Ariela was gone, and her journey had only just begun.
It's like the body of a dying god, in human suffering, the blood, it clots, death and glory for all who believe, lifeless king brought down to his knees. Open the chest, the heart of a beast, evil's been lurking, consuming the feast, lambs to the slaughter, innocence lost, hope and dreams will come at a cost. Burn the skin, it's like a holy war. Burn the skin, it's like a holy war. One by one, by one, by one, by one, sons of Hades carry on. One by one, by one, by one, by one, no remorse for what's been done. Hollow ground is covered in flames, so it is written, so it remains. Here in darkness, nothing to see, down in the depths, the blackness of me. Burn the skin, it's like a holy war. Burn the skin, it's like a holy war. Hallowed ground is covered in flames, so it is written, so it remains. Here in darkness, nothing to see, down in the depths, the blackness of me. Burn the skin, it's like a holy war. Burn the skin, it's like a holy war.
Thanks for watching. See you in new stories.